January 1944. The winter over Europe was brutal, a cold that seemed to freeze the war itself. Across Germany, factories lay buried beneath snow and smoke. Before we begin, if you love uncovering forgotten World War II stories, take a second to subscribe. It keeps history alive, their chimneys coughing weakly into gray skies. In Berlin, the air was heavy with fatigue. Inside the stone walls of the Air Ministry, officers of the Luftwaffe huddled over maps dotted with black crosses, lost squadrons, missing airfields, shattered hopes. Reports came in daily. Allied bombers sighted over Bremen, Frankfurt under attack, rail lines to the Ruhr destroyed again. But what unsettled the German command most wasn't the destruction, it was the scale. The bombers kept coming, the same silver formations day after day, wave after wave, stretching beyond the horizon. For every squadron the Germans managed to intercept, another appeared by dusk. It felt endless. In a war obsessed with numbers, Germany had reached a point where arithmetic itself had become the enemy. How, they wondered, could America keep sending so many? What they didn't yet understand was that the battle for Europe's skies was no longer being fought in the air. It was being fought in the factories of the United States. Thousands of miles from the front, under the soft glow of fluorescent lights, the heart of the American Midwest was alive. From Detroit to Wichita, from Seattle to Fort Worth, the air trembled with a constant vibration, the deep, steady hum of production. That sound, metallic, rhythmic, and endless, was unlike anything else in human history. It came from furnaces melting steel by the ton, from hammers striking wings into shape, from engines tested through the night. It was the heartbeat of a nation that had turned industry into warfare. In 1944, the United States built a bomber every single hour. To the Germans, that was impossible. To the Americans, it was Tuesday. At the Willow Run plant in Michigan, the future had already arrived. A mile-long building so vast that its own weather system formed beneath the roof. 40,000 men and women worked in shifts so perfectly timed that the lights never went out. When one crew finished, another stepped into place without pause. Every 60 minutes, a new B-24 Liberator rolled out of the hangar doors, engines gleaming, wings freshly riveted, nose painted with confidence. The workers called it the Miracle Mile. To them, it wasn't magic. It was math, planning, unity. The German High Command intercepted reports of this operation with disbelief. Propaganda, they said. No nation can sustain such output. But then came the evidence, bomber raids that intensified rather than diminished, formations that refilled overnight, entire cities struck by aircraft that seemed to multiply like shadows. Each hour, another bomber was born. Each hour, another reminder that America's strength was not built on command, but on cooperation. Inside Germany, the mood shifted. Engineers who once boasted of precision, craftsmanship now faced a terrifying realization. They were fighting a civilization that had mastered repetition. German aircraft were hand-built masterpieces, intricate, elegant, time-consuming. Every Me-109 fighter was a product of artisanship, not assembly. Every Focke-Wulf required expert labor that grew rarer with every conscripted man. America, on the other hand, had embraced the opposite philosophy: perfection through mass production, speed through simplicity. The B-24 may not have been beautiful, but it was endless. That difference in ideology, craft versus quantity, precision versus pace, would decide the skies. To the German officers, the idea of building a bomber every hour seemed like science fiction. But the truth was more staggering. America was no longer merely making planes. It was manufacturing time. Every bomber built meant another day gained, another mission launched, another factory kept safe. The Luftwaffe could destroy machines, but it could not destroy ours. By early 1944, German morale in the Air Command began to crack. "We cannot replace our losses," wrote General Adolf Galland. "The Americans, it seems, have discovered how to grow airplanes." He wasn't wrong. For Germany, the sky was a battlefield. For America, it had become an assembly line. And that hum, the deep, constant vibration of the factory belts and engines, became more than sound. It became symbol. In Germany, it represented dread, the echo of approaching bombers, the prelude to the whine of sirens. In America, it was hope, the rhythm of workers who believed they were building something larger than themselves. The same sound that haunted Berlin at midnight inspired Detroit at dawn. As January turned to February, the air above Europe grew louder. The B-17s and B-24s formed endless constellations of silver across the daylight sky. German civilians called them der endlose Schwarm, the endless swarm. Each one carried the same heart, the same hum. By the time the snow melted, that sound, distant yet eternal, had become the war's new drumbeat. The Luftwaffe fought with bravery, but bravery was no longer the deciding factor. In 1944, victory belonged to whoever could build faster than destruction. And no one in history had ever built faster than the United States. The Germans didn't yet know it, but their defeat was already echoing, not in the explosions over Berlin, but in the steady hum of a factory 4,000 miles away. Spring, 1944. The snow had melted across the American Midwest, revealing cities that no longer slept. From dawn to dusk, and through every hour in between, factories thundered with sound. Trains rumbled along glowing rails, carrying engines, steel, and men to places that only existed because war had demanded them. In Michigan, Kansas, Washington, and Texas, the sky above the industrial heartland shimmered with heat and smoke. The air vibrated with the rhythm of machinery, the metallic chorus that carried a nation toward victory. Every bolt turned, every engine tested, every rivet tightened, added to a number so vast it defied imagination. In 1944, the United States produced more than 96,000 aircraft. Each one began the same way, as an echo inside a factory, the hum, the constant pulse of creation. That sound became the new language of democracy, mechanical, relentless, and alive. At the Boeing plant in Seattle, the factory floor stretched farther than a man could see. Miles of aluminum sheets reflected the glare of overhead lamps. Conveyor belts moved slowly, deliberately, as if time itself had been harnessed. Every station performed a ritual of motion. Men and women, thousands of them, each performing a single act, over and over, until the sum became something extraordinary. Wings were riveted, turrets mounted, engines tested. Within hours, another B-17 flying fortress stood ready to be painted, armed, and flown. The German intelligence officers who studied the reports could not comprehend it. To them, war was precision, an art form. Machines were built by craftsmen, not by clerks. Yet here was a nation that had turned industry into orchestra. The Americans called it efficiency. The Germans called it madness. But the skies called it victory. Across the ocean, the Luftwaffe was dying a slow, mechanical death. In 1940, Germany had ruled the air. Its pilots were legends, its aircraft cutting edge. But by 1944, the balance had inverted. For every Messerschmitt that left a German factory, 3 American bombers were already in the air. For every German pilot lost, 10 American airmen replaced him. The Reich still produced fine machines, the Me-262 jet, the Focke-Wulf 190. But they came too late, too few. Germany had perfected technology, but America had perfected process. And process doesn't tire, it doesn't starve, it doesn't surrender. Inside those American factories there was no silence. The hum was everywhere, vibrating through walls, rattling the glass, settling into the bones of every worker. For the men and women of the arsenal of democracy, it became sacred. When the shift whistle blew, tens of thousands moved as one. Trains brought in more workers as the night shift left. Cafeterias served coffee. Music drifted faintly from radios tuned to war news, and outside the lights never dimmed. To an observer it might have looked impersonal, but for those inside it was deeply human, a chorus of ordinary people building something extraordinary. Housewives who had never touched a wrench now bolted tail assemblies with military precision. Teenagers painted identification codes by hand. Retired engineers came out of quiet lives to train new mechanics. They didn't wear uniforms, but they served the same cause. Each hour, another bomber left the line, its engines roaring like a newborn beast. Each hour, the hum deepened, spread, multiplied. In Europe, that hum was heard as thunder. Every German radar station that picked up a new wave of approaching bombers was hearing the echo of America's factories. Every formation of B-17s that blotted out the sun over Cologne or Hamburg was the visible shadow of that sound. To the Germans it felt supernatural. They shot one down. Another appeared. They destroyed a squadron. Another replaced it. The air itself seemed endless. But it wasn't magic. It was math. For every plane Germany built, the United States built 2. For every loss, 2 replacements. For every setback, another 1,000 workers filled the gap. The German officers began to speak of the American tide. Reports circulated through the Reich's command corridors describing a nation whose strength lay not in its soldiers, but in its factories. The Americans, one intelligence analyst wrote, do not fight like us. They manufacture war faster than it can be waged. He was right. By April, American bombers attacked German fuel depots, rail networks, and aircraft plants daily. The Luftwaffe's pilots fought bravely, but their opponents never seemed to run out of machines. Every destroyed bomber was a temporary victory. Every hour afterward was a loss, for another would rise to take its place. In Berlin, General Hermann Göring received the numbers with growing despair. If they can truly build one every hour, he reportedly muttered, then the war is already lost. He wasn't exaggerating. Every bomber carried not just bombs, but a message that America's strength came from collective labor, not command, from unity, not hierarchy. The hum that filled its factories was the sound of freedom made tangible. Messy, loud, imperfect, but unstoppable. It was a new kind of warfare, one the old empires had never imagined. As summer approached, the American war machine reached full rhythm. In June, as Allied forces stormed the beaches of Normandy, bombers filled the sky from horizon to horizon. They weren't just symbols of power. They were the proof of it. When German soldiers looked up and saw thousands of aircraft drifting like silver clouds, they weren't seeing pilots. They were seeing factories. Every formation was an industrial signature, every sound an echo of the hum that never stopped across the ocean. The contrast between the two nations had never been clearer. Germany was exhausted, running on fumes, rationed fuel, and faith. Its people worked in fear, their cities in ruins. America, by contrast, was alive, not untouched, but unified, fueled by an idea larger than victory itself. The hum of American industry was not just noise, it was belief in motion, the belief that free hands, when united, could outbuild tyranny. That sound would carry across the Atlantic for the rest of the war, as constant as time, as vast as hope. And every German officer who heard it, through reports, through radio, through the roar of engines overhead, understood one thing. They weren't fighting men anymore. They were fighting the hum. Summer, 1944. The skies above Europe no longer belonged to the Luftwaffe. What had once been Germany's proudest weapon, the disciplined, fearsome air arm of the Reich, now struggled for breath. Every morning, Allied formations appeared over the horizon, endless, gleaming, unbroken. From Normandy to the Ruhr Valley, the air trembled under the weight of engines. Civilians learned to recognize the sound, the deep, layered vibration of thousands of bombers moving in formation. It was not a roar of rage or chaos, but a steady, deliberate hum, the sound of a nation that had learned to wage war through rhythm. That sound meant one thing: the Americans were coming again. Inside Germany, the disbelief had turned to dread. In underground shelters and makeshift command posts, Luftwaffe officers stared at maps covered in red circles, each marking a new industrial target struck that week. Cologne, Hamburg, Munich, Frankfurt. The Americans bombed by day, the British by night. There was no rest, no pause, no chance to rebuild before the next wave arrived. Germany's factories, once symbols of precision, now operated in chaos. Workers rebuilt machines with scavenged materials. Engineers patched broken lathes with scraps. Even electricity became unreliable. The Reich had lost not just men, but momentum. Across the ocean, the hum never stopped. In Kansas, a Boeing worker named Charles watched as a new B-29 Superfortress, the most advanced bomber of its time, rolled off the line. It dwarfed everything before it, longer, faster, capable of flying higher than any German interceptor. Each one took only days to assemble. Nearby in California, women tested oxygen systems and radar equipment. In Michigan, rail cars carried engines across the country like arteries feeding a living body. The system was perfect, not because it was flawless, but because it was alive. It adapted, it grew, it learned. That was what Germany could not match. German war production, though ingenious, remained bound by tradition, craftsmanship, hierarchy, perfectionism. Each fighter plane was a masterpiece, a symbol of engineering pride. But in war, perfection is slow. By contrast, America's factories embraced imperfection. They prioritized quantity that works over craft, that waits. If a rivet could be replaced, it was good enough. If an engine lasted 10 missions instead of 12, it was victory. The result was a flood of machines that simply would not stop coming. In the summer of 1944 alone, America produced more aircraft than Germany had built since 1939. For the German officers on the ground, the transformation was almost philosophical. They had believed in mastery, the supremacy of the few over the many. Now they faced a force built entirely on the many. Workers, machinists, welders, pilots, none individually remarkable, but together unstoppable. Democracy had found its rhythm, and that rhythm had found its sound. The hum became its anthem, steady, patient, all-consuming. In August, the American bombing campaign intensified. The Luftwaffe, crippled by fuel shortages, sent its few remaining squadrons into the sky. They fought fiercely, courageously, but futility hung over every dogfight. For every bomber they managed to destroy, 2 more appeared the next day. The German airfields themselves became targets. erased before they could launch replacements. Even the famed German flak guns, the 88s, couldn't hold back the tide. Their thunder could drown out the hum for a moment, but not silence it. The hum always returned, steady as a heartbeat. The irony was unbearable. The nation that had pioneered industrial warfare was being buried beneath a more efficient version of its own creation. The Germans had once admired Henry Ford's assembly line, had studied American manufacturing methods in the 1930s, but they had never understood the soul behind them, the belief that machines should serve people, not power. In 1944, that philosophy came home to roost, in steel and fire from 30,000 feet. Every night as the cities burned, the contrast deepened. German citizens dug trenches in parks and fields. They salvaged rubble for makeshift shelters. Yet across the ocean, American workers received hot meals, pay raises, and radio updates of victories their hands had built. The same hum that meant terror in Hamburg meant hope in Wichita. That duality defined the war's final year, the difference between fear and freedom written not in ideology, but in sound. By late 1944, German production collapsed under pressure. Factories moved underground, workers toiled in darkness, raw materials vanished. The Reich's famed discipline turned into desperation. Messerschmitt engineers rushed to complete the Me-262 jet, a technological marvel that might have changed the war, if it had come a year sooner. But innovation without infrastructure was like fire without oxygen. For every Me-262 built, a dozen American bombers took flight. For every pilot trained, another 100 Americans stepped forward. The numbers no longer mattered because the outcome was inevitable. The hum was now louder than the war itself. To the Germans who survived the raids, it was a haunting sound, distant yet constant, like the sky itself had learned to breathe. Even when the bombers were gone, the echo lingered in their ears. In one report recovered after the war, a German officer wrote simply, "We hear them even when they are not here." He was describing more than sound. He was describing the weight of inevitability, the realization that their enemy had found a way to turn unity into machinery. It wasn't a single battle or weapon that defeated Germany. It was time, multiplied by production, carried by sound. Each factory hour in America erased a week of German effort. Each hum of a turbine buried another illusion of invincibility. The Luftwaffe, once the pride of Hitler's empire, was gone, not defeated by strategy, but by math. And when the silence finally fell over Germany's skies, it was not peace. It was exhaustion, the quiet left behind when the hum moves elsewhere. Winter, 1944. The snows returned to Europe, but the skies no longer belonged to Germany. Each dawn began the same way, the faint, distant hum of engines building somewhere far beyond the clouds. It wasn't thunder, nor wind, nor weather. It was the sound of inevitability. Across the continent, from the ruins of Berlin to the frozen fields of the Ardennes, soldiers on the ground could hear it. They didn't need to look up to know what it meant. The Americans were coming again, steady, organized, endless. It wasn't simply that they had more machines. It was that the machines never stopped coming. For the German High Command, that realization was the final defeat. In December 1944, as Hitler launched his last desperate counterattack, the Ardennes offensive, known to history as the Battle of the Bulge, the contrast between the two sides reached its starkest form. The German army fought with courage, but on borrowed time. Their tanks ran on captured fuel. Their divisions were stretched thin, their supplies dwindling. Every victory cost resources they could no longer replace. The Americans, by contrast, fought with depth, an invisible army of workers and machines behind every rifle and plane. Each shell fired in Belgium had been produced in Detroit. Each bomber sortie was supported by thousands of unseen hands, turning wrenches, tightening bolts, checking instruments. Even in the chaos of battle, the hum was there, carried by wind and rumor, by memory and faith. Soldiers who had once been factory workers back home said they could almost hear it, that same rhythmic pulse of industry echoing across an ocean. It reminded them what they were fighting for. By early 1945, the outcome was clear to all. The Luftwaffe was finished. The Reich's industrial heartland lay in ashes. Trains stood frozen on twisted rails, their cargo yards bombed beyond use. Yet in America, the hum continued without pause. The lights in the factories of Kansas, Washington, and Michigan still burned through the night. Even as victory drew near, production lines moved at full speed, not from fear, but from momentum. To the Americans, building had become more than duty. It was identity. Each rivet hammered into a wing, each engine tested in the cold, each hand turned toward creation instead of destruction. All were acts of faith in something larger, that freedom itself could be built. When the first B-29 superfortresses crossed the Pacific and began striking Japan, German officers still in command received the reports with disbelief. A bomber that flies higher than flak, that carries fire across oceans, they wrote, and they are building hundreds of them. But by then, disbelief had lost its power. Germany had been beaten not by surprise, but by scale, not by genius, but by grit. The industrial democracy that many in Europe had dismissed as chaotic and undisciplined had proven itself the most formidable force in history. The hum had won. After the war, when Allied investigators entered what remained of German aircraft factories, they found unfinished prototypes, half-built fuselages, incomplete engines, all brilliant, none sufficient. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, American factories simply changed signs. Victory production became reconstruction production. The same workers who had forged bombers began building tractors, cars, and homes. The hum of industry never stopped. It simply changed key. It was this continuity that astonished German officers after the surrender. In their memoirs, several reflected on what they had witnessed. One wrote, "We thought we were fighting armies. In truth, we were fighting a civilization." Another admitted, "Their factories fought as fiercely as their soldiers. The sound of those engines still echoes in my dreams." It was not resentment. It was awe. The hum became the sound of a new world. From the ashes of war rose an era defined by production, not destruction. The same systems that had built bombers began feeding the world, clothing it, rebuilding it. In Germany itself, that sound would return within a decade, no longer as an enemy's echo, but as a partner's rhythm. The Marshall Plan rebuilt what bombs had destroyed. The same nation that had been buried beneath industry was resurrected by it. That was the ultimate transformation. From fear to cooperation, from defeat to rebuilding. For historians, the phrase "one bomber every hour" became shorthand for American might. But its true meaning lay deeper in what it symbolized. Each hour represented not just machinery, but belief. Belief that millions of ordinary people, united in labor, could alter the course of history. The bomber itself was only metal. The real weapon was the unity that built it. That hum, born in the furnaces of democracy, proved stronger than any ideology forged in fear. When the last air raid siren fell silent, and Europe emerged blinking into peace, that sound still lingered. It echoed in the empty hangars, in the ruins of factories, in the hearts of those who had lived beneath it. It was the sound of what modern humanity had become, powerful enough to destroy, but capable enough to rebuild. Today, if one walks through the restored hangars of Willow Run or the quiet halls of Boeing's wartime plants, the air still carries that ghostly vibration. It is faint now, just memory. But if you listen closely, you can still hear it. The pulse of engines, the clang of tools, the rhythm of hands and hearts working in unison. That hum was more than machinery. It was democracy in motion. It spoke of freedom not as words, but as work. And long after the last bomber rolled from its factory doors, that sound, steady, human, unstoppable, remains the echo of a world that learned to build faster than it could be destroyed.